It's so pleasing to be here, to be in a room full of people who are working to help youngsters make the very best of themselves. I just want to alert you, I think, to a problem you might have with me, and it arises from the fact that English is not my native tongue. I didn't learn English till I started primary school. I was brought up in Yorkshire, and we had a very, very powerful dialect, not at all English. I have a good vocabulary. You won't have any trouble with the individual words, but you might have quite a lot of trouble with the order in which I put them. Because under stress, and you understand this is quite stress, I'm likely to revert to my dialect. And in the dialect, we are trying to put the subject at the end of the sentence. So you have to watch out for that. So it's a funny place to get a haircut is Harrogate. You see, you've no idea. You've no idea what that sentence is about till you reach the end of it. So just wait till I reach the end of a sentence, and then you can work it back. Okay. I've been asked to talk about one of my favourite topics, which is that. And I'm faced by an audience, several hundred, all of whom are experts at exactly that. So that's quite scary, as you can imagine. I feel a little bit like Liz Taylor's 7th or 8th husband must have felt like on the honeymoon night. You know, you can imagine faced with such expertise, you know what you want to happen, but is it going to be all that memorable? And you're faced with this, you just have to do your best, and so I'm going to do my best. And just to repeat some of the things that Robert said to me about me because they're relevant. I was a school teacher at one time. I taught secondary school maths and science, and I wasn't teaching long before I began to worry about what I called the gap, which is the gap between teaching and learning. So teachers will be familiar with it, and so will you all, that the teacher works hard, and some children seem to learn very quickly, some children seem to learn enough, and some children seem to learn very little at all. And that worries you as a teacher, because you think, well, where is all this teaching going? There's some kind of hole somewhere. It's not having an effect. Why is that? And I started researching that, and I spent several decades researching how it is that children, when faced with good teachers, actually fail to learn maths. And I worked with younger and younger children looking for the origins of these problems with a view to advising teachers on how to improve their teaching. So that was several decades, but I reached an age where whilst I could reliably get down to talk to young children, I couldn't reliably get up again because their knees go. So I needed another career. And so I turned from being a researcher active in classrooms to being a research reviewer. I now read research and pull it all together, and I choose out the best research and bring that, and that's the basis of my presentation today. It's based on the world's best research that I can find on some very significant questions. Now, there's a problem with that, because the fact is, as a research reviewer, I can only review what I can read. So it's very likely that there's some very good work going on by people here in this room and by families and schools here in Dublin and throughout Ireland. But if it hasn't been written about and I can't get at it, I cannot tell you about it. Well, that's no harm in a sense, because you know your local work, you know your stuff. So I'm bringing you a very wide-ranging, world's best research view on these questions. Okay, parental involvement. So what's at stake? What's the big issue there? Are parents as important as they seem? And if so, important to what? And the second thing is, so what? What are we supposed to do about it? When we know about it, what are you supposed to do about it? Are there some difficulties? And then, is anybody doing good work? And if so, does it work? And I'm going to give you the quick view. Don't go out after this quick view, incidentally. I'm going to enrich it. But the quick view is parents are a huge amount more important than even you think they are. Hugely important in the development of children's educational achievement. Some parents find it very difficult to play this role for some very pressing reasons. That being said, some organisations are working together with parents and doing good work. And I'll show you spectacularly good work so that you can feel very confident. If they can do it, you can do it, if indeed you are not already doing it. Okay, I want to start now. You've invited a maths teacher. You must expect a graph, okay? You cannot have imagined I would do a presentation without a graph. And this graph is very familiar to you because what it describes is the situation where you give a teacher a bunch of kids, the teacher teaches the kids, and what happens is some do extremely well, some really struggle, and most are in the middle, and there's a picture that you are entirely familiar with, and I think you agree. Okay. Now that could be a bunch of 4-year-olds learning to read. It could be a bunch of 18-year-olds learning statistics in the high school, and so on. Or it could be every 11-year-old in Ireland describing their maths results. You get the same picture. Some kids do very well, most middling well, and some really struggling at the bottom. And every government through the world recognises this picture and says, well, we must do better. We must shift that graph, okay, so that everybody does better. In England, they call it raising the bar. If you succeeded, you'd know you succeeded because the graph would move. Everybody would be better. So next year's kids do better than last year's kids. There's actually something equally important in that graph that maybe teachers often don't see it, but researchers do see it, which is that graph is not only a distribution of achievement, it's a distribution of every good thing you would want your kids to have, okay? Kids who do well in school get more social goodies than kids who don't do well in school. Let me be specific about that. Kids who are at the top end of this distribution live longer, significantly longer. The top 20% live about 10 years longer than the bottom 20%. Furthermore, they live longer in good health. They earn more. They have more satisfaction out of their relationships. They spend less time in psychiatric wards, and they spend significantly less time in jail. That is a distribution of social inequality. Now, it's statistical. It is statistical, i.e. it doesn't always hold true. So, some kids do perfectly well in school and make a complete mess of life. And some kids don't do at all well in school and have wonderfully successful lives. But the pattern is extremely powerful, that kids who do well in school get the goodies out of society, suffer less, get more out. It is a graph of social inequality. And so governments all over the world, not quite, but all the governments in, certainly in Northern Europe, Europe-wide, America, Australia, and so on, they challenge us another challenge. Close the gap. That gap is very, very significant social challenge. And the challenge is, can we narrow it? If we can't close it, can we narrow it? Now, if you want to narrow it without prejudice, because you don't want the kids at the top end to be any worse off. So if the kids at the top end, say, are going to progress 12 months in an academic year, the kids at the bottom end have got to progress 14 months in an academic year, at least to begin to narrow that gap over a reasonable timescale. That is a really, really big challenge. And to do that, what governments all over the world are doing is they are intervening in the educational process with educational policies. Change the curriculum, change the exam system, change this, change that, change leadership, change structures. You have interventions. I want to show you the most successful intervention ever in educational work. Okay? I'll show you the effects and then I'll tell you what it is. The most successful intervention moves kids from that blue graph to that red graph. I just want you to have a little look at that because that is staggering. I think you'll agree. That is staggering. You're asking, how on earth do you do that? Because if you look at the low attainers on the red graph, they're doing as good as the average kids on the blue graph. If you look at the average kids on the red graph, they're beating 98% of the kids on the blue graph. Boy, wouldn't you just like to have that? That would transform educational world. Notice it doesn't narrow the gap. Notice you've still got social injustice. But still, we've raised the bar mightily. How have we done it? Well, I'll tell you what research says how we've done it. We've done it using one-to-one tuition. Nearly. You have to finish the sentence. One-to-one tuition using expert teachers trained in one-to-one tuition. It's no good having amateurs do it. If you think one-to-one tuition is good, think about getting your dad to teach you to learn to drive. One-to-one tuition can be catastrophic in the wrong hands. You need to have good people, well-trained, and you cannot afford it. Let me be quite blunt about it. You can't afford it. So why am I wasting your time showing you this graph then? I'm not wasting your time. What I want to show you on this graph is that that is what kids can do when we get everything right for them. That is what kids can do. They can do mightily better than we ever realize once we get everything right for them. So this graph really becomes a vision. You might even say it's a dream or a hope. Certainly a vision, because they can do it if we can get things right for them. Okay, now I just have to go technical for you for just 1 minute. Please bear with me. You might want to just make 2 little notes at this point. When we intervene in the educational progress, we're looking for an effect, an impact, okay? And we measure it in what we call the effect size. And the effect size is how far have we moved the average score. In this case, how far have we moved the average on the blue line to the average on the red line? You okay so far? Effect size, okay? Now, do you get this program Pointless on television, a kind of quiz game? You might want to remember this stuff in case you ever get on Pointless. It's really obscure. We're looking for effect size. We measure it in units called standard deviations. I wouldn't do this to you if I didn't need it later on. We measure it in units called standard deviations, and the biggest effect size we've ever had is that, 2 standard deviations. Just log that, the number 2, because that's what we're going to compare some stuff with. 2 standard deviations, the gold standard. Okay, let's go back to that distribution now. Look at that spread. What causes that spread? Well, loads of things cause that spread. Why do some kids do better in school than others? Well, of course, the kids are involved in it. I'm not going to read this out to you. You would have your own list and so on and so forth. Schools make a difference. Schools can make a mighty difference on that gap and so on. Family characteristics. I had an elder sister. She taught me to read and write before I ever went to school. That's brilliant. Now, if your government could provide every family with an elder sister, that would be a very good policy. Except might not work, because my elder sister couldn't teach my younger brother anything, because he wouldn't sit down long enough. He was always off everywhere. So kids make a difference. Okay. I'm going to focus on parental involvement, parental engagement, but it's not to say that there aren't lots of other things, including schools and families and peers and siblings and so on and so on. They all have their bit. We haven't got time to talk about them all this morning. We're talking about, there is one thing I need to get rid of, however, it's not yet on that list, and it is poverty, because people frequently say, poverty makes a big difference. Right, let me show you some statistics. These are from England 2008, and we're going to compare the achievements, various factors about school achievement of children aged 16, okay, in English schools. Some of them are in the poorest 25% of families, and some of them are in the richest 25% of families. Let's have a look at how they do. There you go. So, only 20% of the poorest kids in the poorest families get 5 GCSEs, whereas 75% of kids in the richest families do that. NEET is not in education, employment, or training. These are kids who at 17 have disappeared out of the education, employment, and training world. Okay? Far more from poor families than rich families have gone off the education and training register. And more poor family kids play truant than rich family kids. So there's a clear implication. Now, I do not find that very persuasive as fingering poverty in the educational achievement world. I'm not in favour of poverty. I was brought up in extreme poverty. Nobody I've ever met thinks poverty is a good idea. On the other hand, it doesn't stop kids doing well in school. Okay? Because if we look at these statistics, the vast majority of kids from poor families do not play truant. Okay? Although some do, the great majority do not. The vast majority of them are not off the system. If 15% are neat, 85% are not. They're still engaged in education and training. And 20% do perfectly well in school. So what we did as statistically is we looked at just the poor kids. Forget the rich kids. Look at the poor kids and say, right, why do some poor kids do better than other poor kids? What's the difference? Here's the difference. What are the big factors in their lives that mean they do better in school? This is a league table I'm going to show you with the biggest factor at the top. That, okay? Why do some kids who are brought up in poverty do better than kids who are also brought up in poverty? The answer is because the parents are different. Because the parents have different attitudes and behaviours. There are other factors, but that one swamps the others. And what that analysis shows, the quote at the bottom, what parents do is a lot more important than who they are. Doesn't matter what colour they are or what religion they've got or what social class they've got. It is what they do that makes the difference. How much difference? Now, how big is the effect? I was asked to answer that question by the Department for Education in 2003, because what they'd done then is they'd spent huge amounts of money trying to push standards up and narrow the gap. And they had pushed standards up a little bit, but they hadn't narrowed the gap at all. And the Secretary of State for Education said to me, we've heard a rumour that parents might be a significant factor, and we're thinking of writing some large cheques. How much effect might we expect if we spent on parental involvement? So I scoured the world's research to answer that question. And without going into the technical details, I'm just going to show you the answer to the question. And it's the way you answer that is to say, how much of that gap of achievement is down to differences in parenting compared to, shall we say, down to differences in schooling. Okay. Effects of parents on the achievement gap compared to effects of schools on the achievement gap. I'm going to show you the effect at age 7, 11 and 16, and the numbers that come up. I'm just going to pause. Are there any statisticians in the room? Okay, the numbers can be treated as percentages, okay? If there are any smart aleck statisticians in the room, I know they're not percentages, but they can be treated as percentages. What percent of that gap is down to parents, and what percent of that gap is down to schools? There. That much. That much. Okay? Let me just take that top line. Age 7. There's your gap, achievement gap, okay? 5% of it is down to differences in schools caused by differences between your best schools and your worst schools. 29% of it is down to differences in parenting caused between your most effective parents and your least effective parents. Watch my arms, because I'm going to wave them now meaningfully, okay? This is not a rhetorical device. This is a teaching device. There's your gap. Suppose you were a philanthropist and you had £1 billion and you were worried about that social gap. You had £1 billion to spend. And let's suppose you decided to spend it on making your weakest schools as good as your strongest schools. All right? And let's suppose you were successful in that. Watch carefully. This is how much you would close that gap. Did you see that? You see that? That was £1 billion well spent, wasn't it? That was. Now, suppose some good fairy comes along and gives you £1 billion back, or indeed gives you another £1 billion. That would be even nicer. So we put that little gap back, and you've now got £1 billion, and you can now spend it on helping your struggling parents to be as good as your strongest, most effective parents. Let's suppose you could do that, and let's suppose it worked. How much would you close the gap? That much. Okay? 29%. There's your leverage. Yes? Life's like that. You want to insulate your house, you can spend money on carpets or double glazing or loft insulation, whatever. Some spend gets you more return on effort, and some doesn't get you much return on effort, however much you spend. And this is a case in point. Okay. I put some flesh on that. At age 16, it's only 14 percentage points down to the school, because as kids get older, they unshackle themselves from their parents. You would expect that. That's what's supposed to happen. Parents have less influence. It's called growing up and becoming independent. 14%. That actually turns out to be 26 points at GCSE. When I tell secondary heads in England that, I have to show them the numbers to prove it. It is so big. It's a bigger lever than they've got anywhere else in school. Parental engagement, kids who are supported by parents in secondary school, score 26 points more than kids not supported by parents in secondary school. It's a huge, huge effect. There's been, I know you're all primary, and I'm going to illustrate this in primary, but there's just been a study from American high schools, and they've got several thousand schools, 10,000 students, and they've separated the schools, strong schools, weak schools, according to their exam results. And they've separated the kids, strong parental engagement versus weak parental engagement. You're one or the other. There's nothing subtle about this study. And then they look at their results of kids in schools. And what they find is that the kids in the weak schools with strong parental support do better than the kids in the strong schools with weak parental support. So to quote the authors of the study, parenting trumps schooling. Now, of course, ideally, you want to be in a strong school with strong parental support, working together. It is clear. This is not, I am not anti-school. I spent too long a teacher. My friends are teachers. My wife was a teacher, etc. I'm very pro-school. This is nothing I'm doing here is knocking schools, because you can have the nicest, most supportive, committed parents you like, and if you've got a rotten chemistry teacher, you are in trouble. Okay? The ideal is you want both. And if we look, the younger you get, the bigger the effect of parenting. So in fact, there is evidence on kids who are 4.5 years of age. Now, we don't have achievement scores for kids 4.5 years of age, but there is a very, very common test called the picture vocabulary test, right? It's what it says. You show the kid a picture and say, what's that? It's a picture of a dog, what's that? Picture of a ball, what's that? Some kids can name you dozens and dozens and dozens of, and some kids can name you not one or two. They have virtually no vocabulary, no capacity to name things. Now, I wouldn't pull that out of the hat if that's all it was, but the fact is the scores on the picture vocabulary test are very strong predictors of school success, because kids come in with this huge vocabulary and they engage with their teachers and the curriculum and so on. Huge, huge differences. So much, in fact, that some kids at age 4.5 have the vocabulary of a 2-year-old. They are 2 years behind. Well, I hope what you take away from this is parental engagement is a phenomenally major determinant of these social differences in achievement, which turn into social differences in all those goodies that we want for kids. What is it that parents do? I'm not spending a lot of time on this slide because you know what parents do. Good parents are good. They have a warm relationship with their children. They are consistent in the way they engage with them. They have an authoritative style. Okay, not authoritarian. Authoritarian parenting is really bad. It's bullying, and it's bad for children. Huge amounts of research show that. Laissez-faire, I don't know why we break into French at this point, but laissez-faire parenting, that's what they call it. It's kind of do-as-you-like parenting, self-actualization, as the Americans sometimes call it. Very, very bad for children. Somewhere along the line is the parent who is a good teacher, steady, disciplined, organized. Inconsistency, like it's sometimes called the Desforges approach to parenting, where you're authoritarian in the morning, straighten your tie, polish your shoes, check your homework, and then in the evening, do as you like, I'm knackered. This is not good for children. But the key factor in parenting, once you've got all that right, is the home learning environment, HLE, the home learning environment. What opportunities and engagements do you have in the home? And let me tell you, this does not need money. And it doesn't need you to be clever. Or I was telling the Minister of Education, my dad was a docker. He was not an educated man. My mum left school when she was 8 to look after her own mother's ever-increasing family. We were poor, not by Sudanese standards, but certainly by European standards, very, very poor. And we had a wonderful childhood. Why? Because we were always engaged in endless conversations. Huge argument, endless argument and conversation. My dad used to love provoking a row among his children. I haven't got time. I could richly illustrate that, I have to say, but I haven't got time. But you know the scene. Why don't some parents do that? Why doesn't everybody do this? Well, we know quite a lot about that, and there are just some of the reasons why they don't do it. They live in social chaos. They're engaged in abuse of various kinds: drug, alcohol, sexual abuse, physical abuse. And they're clinically depressed. You can go on. Some children are actually quite difficult, or at least a relationship can become very, very difficult. At the bottom end, there's problems created by schools. My generation of teachers used to have kids leave school, 10% of whom were illiterate. Not only were they illiterate, but they were really fed up with the treatment they'd got from teachers like me and in schools of the sort that I used to work in. They do not like schools and they do not like teachers. In short, I am not underestimating the difficulties sometimes of working together. There are real difficulties in working together for some people. And it doesn't get any easier. We have a lot of research on modern parenting. Boy, has parenting changed. The conditions of modern parenting are not the conditions of traditional parenting. Before the Second World War, you could fairly be confident, dad, mum, kids. No, it's not like that at all. There's very large numbers of one-parent families, for a start. Children are much, much more powerful than they used to be, much more manipulative. There's a lot of research on policies where we've tried to get parents to bring certain changes in their kids, get kids to stop smoking. No effect whatsoever. There's no success. Can you get kids to stop parents smoking? You bet you can. Kids are much better at stopping parents smoking than parents are at stopping kids smoking. There's a change in the relationships. Again, I don't want to use all the time up, but the working circumstances now, very, very frequently, both parents are out at work. So both parents come home tired out, absolutely tired out. And in short, there's no merit in judging people, and there's no merit in imagining we can go back to an ideal past, because you can't. It's gone. We have to address circumstances as they are, with the people as is, and just take a realistic line on it. So what's to do? Well, if you are involved in any form of leadership in an educational setting, and you are, because leaders don't have to be at the front with a fancy title anymore, that's kind of old think. The youngest teacher can form a leadership. The youngest, most inexperienced person can take a leadership function, push the boat out, get involved, and so on. That's what working together means. And what every education outfit will have is a strategy for parent support, because of this massive leverage they have on children's achievement. And that requires some analysis, some thought, because what's needed on this street is not needed on that street. So you've got to get it right locally. It needs some money spending on it. It needs a lot of thought about how we can use partnerships in this endeavour. And MER, that dreaded word that certainly teachers don't like. Anyway, MER, it's not a word, it's an acronym. MER, monitoring, evaluation, and review. If you're going to work in this field, you need to have a good, clear idea of what you're doing. Is it working? And the degree that it's working or isn't working, you need to review it and change it. What does working mean? It means what's in it for kids. Okay, if anybody works with parents and the kids don't get a benefit out of it, then from an educational point of view, that hasn't worked. We're looking for benefit for kids. Okay. If you're looking at a school level, school leaders need to recognise that families matter and make a difference. Seriously, take that on. They need to push the boat out and be proactive. They need to think through this. I'll say this another 100 times before the end. What's in it for kids? Outcomes focused. What's in it for kids? And if we haven't got the skills now, this day, because in England, nobody trains teachers to work with parents. We just don't do it. We don't do it in initial training. We don't do it in in-service. It just doesn't happen. So if we want it to happen, we've got to make it happen. This is what's got to be done. Okay, is anybody doing a good job? Yeah, this doing a good job. Now, I looked, but I haven't found a report from Ireland on this kind of practice. So please forgive me. This is a report from London, and it's Ofsted, and you can get it for nothing. You can download it off their website, Ofsted 211. There's a lovely report called Schools and Parents, and it shows you what good schools are doing to engage in partnership with parents. So it's richly illustrated. Now I'll give you a very quick overview, but I just want to speak of analogy. Work in this field is like building a house. You know, when you build a house, there's a huge amount of work that at first sight doesn't get you anywhere. Because when you build a house, the first thing you do is dig a big hole in the ground. And it's expensive and it's hard work. And all you've got is a hole in the ground. You then do a lot more hard work and spend a lot more money filling the hole with concrete. And you still haven't got a house, but now we can build a house. And from a school's point of view, and from a parent's point of view, there's very often quite a lot of foundation work needs doing. And it's necessary. It might not look very productive, but it's crucial. The first thing is working to get on with each other. Good schools, basic, they actually genuinely value parents. They recognise that parents as partners. And it's not just a slogan over the door. It is deeply reflected in whole school policy. Parents are genuine partners, and they invest money and time in training their teachers in conjunction with parents to be better at working with parents. They communicate better with parents. They give parents a huge amount of information and help them use it. It's not enough to give parents information if they cannot penetrate the statistics or the averages or the scores or whatever. And if they can't, like, so what? So what, my kid got 6 out of 10 on a spelling test. What am I supposed to do about that? It is an enriched communication that helps people relate. And it goes through consultations and formal complaints procedure and so on. But it goes nowhere. We've now got the hole in the ground filled with concrete. But unless we do something about that, we are not going to change the scene. This we must do something about. What do we do about this? There are a million things you can do about this. I'm going to show you the most successful. My time, I think, is close to running out. What are the most successful things that people have done? Again, worldwide research. Some of this research is from France. Quite a bit of it is from America. Some of it is from England, and a bit of it is from Australia. But in general, I'm going to skip this slide. In general, the most successful projects involve family learning. They involve engaging the family as well as the child in the youngster's learning. And from a school's point of view, this takes leadership, it takes good relationships with parents, it takes a good program with a good track record so that you know it's going to work, and it focuses on helping parents build confidence and helping parents with their literacy, with their kids' literacy and numeracy. Okay? And now I'm going to show you some of the results of these successful programs. But before I do, I want to remind you of that number 2. Okay? The biggest impact we've ever had in education is 2 standard deviations, which has been got through very, very expensive one-to-one tuition. Just bear that in mind. I'll give you another comparative number. We spent something like £400 million on a national literacy strategy to promote, well, obviously, literacy, and it had an effect size of 0.1. So 400 million quid for an effect size of 0.1. One-to-one tuition for an effect size of 2. Let's have a look what family learning has done. Okay? There's been a large, increasing number of family learning projects now which have worked with the most difficult cases in areas of great social chaos, with parents who themselves are not literate or numerate. This is not a requirement. And what you get is in programs where parents have been helped to read to their child, you get an effect size of 0.18, which is twice the size of the National Literacy Project. Staggering. Okay? If you help the parent rather, to listen to the child read, begin to teach them some of the skills of a reception class teacher, you treble that. And if you get the parent to teach specific reading skills, these are parents in tough places, inner Birmingham, inner London, downtown Paris, you double the effect size again. Huge, huge. Talk about working. This is what you can get when you work together, focusing on children's achievement. Now, I've just got time for a 3-line summary, I think, which is this. The first is parents have a much bigger impact on children's achievement than even you thought. Maybe 10 times as much as you thought. It's a big cause, these differences in parenting, of social injustice, a huge driver of social injustice. which is bad for everybody. It's bad for the people at the bad end, and it's bad for the people at the good end. No time to explain why that is. It's bad for all of us. Social injustice is cancerous for any society. Can we help? Yes. Can we help big time? Yes. By going to the hardest cases, working in partnership, focusing on children's achievement, you can get huge gains, I would say, at an affordable price. But working together, focusing on children is the key. Thank you for listening to me.